I always imagined homecomings would bring comfort, a familiar embrace waiting after the long grind of city life. But stepping into my childhood house that brisk November evening felt different. The air was cold, the silence was sharp, and something inside me whispered that this visit wouldn't be the sanctuary I'd been hoping for. I hadn't been home in 6 months, not by accident, but by choice. Work, grad school applications, and, if I'm being honest, emotional distance kept me away. Still, I returned for Thanksgiving, convincing myself that maybe time had softened the old wounds between me and my family. I wasn't expecting fireworks or heartfelt apologies, just civility, a meal, maybe a few laughs. Instead, I walked into a house that felt like a stranger had been living there. The furniture was the same, the photos still lined the mantel, but something was missing. Warmth. Maybe. Or trust. I shrugged off the unease and headed upstairs to the small room that still held dusty pieces of my childhood. As I unpacked, I decided to log into my bank account, a habit I'd picked up since I started saving aggressively for my master's degree. I planned to check the balance, feel a little pride in how far I'd come, and tuck that quiet satisfaction into my back pocket for the weekend. But when the screen loaded, my heart dropped. The numbers didn't make sense. My savings account, my grad school fund, should have had just over $18,000. Instead, it barely scraped past 70. I blinked, refreshed the page, told myself it was probably a glitch. But the transaction history didn't lie. Systematic withdrawals over the past few months. Large amounts. Always in round numbers. Always pulled by someone else. Panic knotted in my throat as I scrolled faster, desperate for a mistake, for some trace that I had authorized these transfers and simply forgotten. But the bank showed the same name tied to every withdrawal: Marissa Barrett. My mother. My breath turned shallow. I felt the sting of betrayal before I could even process what it meant. I had worked for that money since I was 16 weekend shifts, summer jobs, scraping by while my friends traveled and shopped. Every dollar was a brick in the life I was building for myself. A chance to finally step out of the cycle of survival that my family seemed content to repeat. And now, it was gone. Just like that. As if all my sacrifices meant nothing to them. I bolted downstairs, the walls closing in as I confronted my mother in the kitchen. Where she was casually stirring cranberry sauce like this was just another Thanksgiving prep day. I couldn't even keep my voice steady. Why is my savings account empty? She didn't flinch, didn't panic. She didn't even deny it. Her sigh was almost annoyed. Paige, Tyler needed help. It was urgent. Tyler, my brother. It always came back to him. The gambling debts, the failed businesses, the way my parents patched up every disaster he created with duct tape and borrowed time. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails bit into my palms. So you just took my money. It's not like that, she said quickly, as if she could smooth over this gaping wound with soft words. It's family money. And you're doing fine. You've always been fine. That sentence gutted me in a way I wasn't prepared for. You've always been fine. As if my success, my stability, made me less entitled to what was mine. As if my ability to survive made me their safety net. As if I was obligated to fund Tyler's self-destruction because I hadn't yet fallen apart. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. I wouldn't give her that. When were you going to tell me? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the stove. We figured we'd pay you back before you noticed. Before I noticed, they weren't even planning to ask. They were planning to steal. I left the kitchen before my rage could combust. My legs took me to the only place that ever felt safe in that house, Grandpa Arthur's den. The scent of old books and cedar still lingered, wrapping around me like a forgotten hug. I found him there, sitting in his worn leather chair, eyes soft with concern before I said a word. They took everything. Grandpa. My voice cracked, the weight of it collapsing in my chest. The money I saved for grad school, it's gone. For Tyler. Again. His hand, weathered but steady, reached out and covered mine. I'm sorry, Paige. I truly am. But maybe now's the time you stop being the one who always fixes everything. I thought they loved me, I whispered. They do, he said gently. But sometimes love gets buried under patterns people don't know how to break. It doesn't mean you have to let them keep burying you with it. I didn't realize until that moment that I'd been waiting my whole life for someone in this family to tell me that I didn't have to keep paying the price for Tyler's mistakes. And right then, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to be their backup plan anymore. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Growing up in my house felt like there were rules, unwritten ones, invisible to the outside world, but carved into the walls of our home like a secret code. Only we were expected to understand. And if you didn't, well, you'd learn the hard way. There was one rule that never changed. No matter how old I got, Tyler always came first. It wasn't something anyone said out loud. My parents never gathered us at the dinner table to declare it. They didn't have to. It lived in the quiet decisions. In the way the house would shift to orbit around my younger brother's latest crisis. When we were kids, I thought this was just what love looked like. Tyler would break Mom's favorite vase. He was curious and just a boy. I'd forget to take the trash out. I was irresponsible and old enough to know better. Tyler would come home with failing grades. He needed extra support. I'd bring home an A- I needed to push harder and stop coasting. I spent most of my life trying to earn what Tyler seemed to receive without effort. I don't remember the exact moment I realized the scales weren't just tipped, they were bolted to the ground on his side, but the weight of it pressed into every corner of my life. I used to believe it was because I was the oldest, that maybe responsibility just naturally landed on me. But over time, I noticed that responsibility in our house wasn't something you shared. It was something you dumped on the one who wouldn't fight back. That was me. By the time I was 14, I was babysitting Tyler every weekend while my parents went to their business dinners, which I later learned were actually poker nights and weekend getaways. When I was 16, I started working part-time to save for college because no one in my family ever talked about paying for my future. They assumed I'd figure it out. But when Tyler wanted new sneakers, a gaming console, or money for soccer tournaments, it appeared. It always appeared. I told myself it was because he was younger. He needed more, but Tyler's needs never stopped growing. The older we got, the more the family bent to make room for his mistakes. When he started gambling at 19, my parents acted like he'd just gotten a little carried away with sports betting. They covered his debts quietly, as if it was just another expense like groceries or utilities. They never made him face it. They never made him stop. When he dropped out of college, they told everyone he was taking time to figure out his path. When he totaled his car while driving drunk, they replaced it the next week and never spoke about it again. I was 23 at the time, living in a cramped apartment while juggling 2 jobs and paying my way through school. No one offered me a hand. No one offered to cover my expenses, but they always had enough to clean up after Tyler. What stung the most wasn't that they helped him, it was that they never expected anything from him. Not accountability, not growth, not even gratitude. I realized that in our family, love came without conditions for Tyler, but for me, love always came with a list of expectations. Be responsible. Be strong. Don't ask for help. Take care of everyone else. Sometimes I wonder if they even saw me as a daughter, or just as a safety net that wouldn't snap no matter how hard they pulled. The more I reflect on those years, the more I understand how I was slowly taught to disappear. I became the dependable one because someone had to be. I became the forgiving one because someone had to be. I became the strong one because someone had to hold up the roof when the storms came. And Tyler, he was allowed to break. I think somewhere deep down, they truly believed they were protecting him, that shielding him from consequences was an act of love. But love without accountability isn't protection, it's sabotage. I didn't hate my brother. I didn't even envy him. What I felt was more complicated, a sticky mixture of guilt, sadness, and exhaustion. I wanted him to get better. But I also wanted to stop losing pieces of myself to his chaos. When I confronted my parents about the stolen savings, it wasn't the first time they'd made me sacrifice for him. It was just the first time I caught them in the act. The truth is, Tyler's addiction to gambling wasn't the only addiction in our family. My parents were addicted to saving him. And I was addicted to earning their love. But not anymore. Standing in the middle of my childhood home that night, I realized the unspoken rules didn't have to stay unspoken. I didn't have to play this role they'd written for me. I was done being the fallback plan they had taken from me over and over because they believed I would never walk away. But I was starting to realize I could, and maybe this time, I would. In a family that constantly made me feel like I was either invisible or responsible for everyone else's happiness. There was one person who never made me question my worth. My grandfather, Arthur Barrett. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He didn't smother me with praise or empty words. But somehow, I always felt safest when I was sitting on the wooden stool in his garage, watching him tinker with old radios and fix things no one else had the patience to care about. He didn't call me the strong one or the fixer. To him, I was just Paige. No titles, no expectations, just me. When I was a kid, he would let me hand him tools while he worked. He'd always give me the real ones too. Not the plastic pretend sets my parents thought were more appropriate. I didn't realize until I was older how rare that was, someone trusting me to hold real weight in my hands, even when I was too small to fully carry it. Careful, he'd say with a knowing smile. Real tools, real responsibility. But I know you can handle it. Back then, I didn't understand how much those words would shape me. As I got older, those garage afternoons turned into kitchen table talks. He was the one I called when I didn't know how to file taxes, when I needed to replace a flat tire, or when I simply needed someone who would listen without rushing to offer solutions. He was steady, predictable in the best way. And most importantly, he never made me feel like I was less important than Tyler. When I told him about the stolen savings account, about how my parents had drained my future to save my brother's mistakes once again, I expected him to say what everyone else did, that family comes first, that I should be patient, that they meant well. But he didn't. He looked me square in the eye and said, "Honey, people who love you don't keep asking you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm." His voice didn't shake. There was no hesitation. And in that moment, something inside me that had been screaming for years finally felt heard. Grandpa had seen through all of it long before I did. He knew how my parents operated. He had watched them bend the rules over and over to make Tyler's life easier, even if it meant breaking mine in the process. But instead of stepping in and lecturing them, he had quietly focused on making sure I knew I was worth more than what they gave me. "You don't have to carry everything, Paige," he told me that day. "They've gotten too used to leaning on you because you never let yourself crumble." I wanted to believe I was strong, that I could carry the weight of my family's dysfunction without breaking. But sitting across from him, I realized strength isn't about how much you can hold, it's about knowing when to put things down. He leaned back in his worn armchair, his breathing slower than it used to be. The years had caught up with him, and I hated seeing how his once steady hands now trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee cup. I wanted to protect him from the burden of knowing what our family had done to me, but he wouldn't let me shield him. "Don't hide this from me," he said firmly. "We face things together in this family. At least you and I do. Those words struck me hard because I realized how few times I'd ever truly faced anything with someone else. I'd spent so many years standing alone, believing that asking for help made me weak. But not with Grandpa. He wanted to help me carry this, not fix it for me, not take it away, but stand beside me while I fought for what I deserved. It was such a simple thing, but it shifted everything. I confessed to him that I didn't know what to do next, that I was furious, that I was tired, that a part of me wanted to walk away and never come back. His answer was soft, but resolute. You can be angry. You can be hurt. You can even walk away if that's what keeps you safe. But don't ever let them convince you that you're wrong for standing up for yourself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for wanting to protect myself. Looking back, I realized Grandpa was the only one who ever taught me what love should look like: honest, steady, and never conditional. He didn't love me because I held the family together. He loved me simply because I existed. That was enough. Even now, I can still hear his voice in my head. You've got more backbone than you realize. Kiddo, don't let them make you forget that. That became my anchor, the quiet courage he passed to me. The belief that I was allowed to stop being the family's safety net. I just had to believe it, too. And with him by my side, I was finally ready to start. I always thought I had seen the worst of it. The favoritism, the stolen savings, the quiet sacrifices I was expected to make while my parents wrapped Tyler in bubble wrap and handed him the scissors. But what I found next proved that their betrayal went even deeper past me, past money, past excuses. They weren't just using me. They were using Grandpa, too. It started with the mail, a pile of unopened envelopes on Grandpa's kitchen table. Some of them marked final notice, others yellowed with time. He'd always been meticulous about bills, always the kind of man who balanced his checkbook to the penny. So the stack struck me as strange. Something didn't add up. When I asked him about it, he just waved me off. It's nothing, sweetheart. I've just been a little forgetful. But I knew him better than that. I knew what forgetful looked like, and this wasn't it. So while he napped that afternoon, I did what I'd never allowed myself to do before I dug. I went through drawers, file boxes, the little safe he thought I didn't know about, and what I uncovered stopped me cold. It wasn't just my savings they'd drained. My parents had been siphoning money from Grandpa for years, quietly, systematically. Personal loans with no repayment, medical copays they promised to cover, only to stick him with the bill. Even a second mortgage on his house, something he'd apparently signed just to help out for a little while. But the worst part Grandpa had never told me, he'd carried it alone. Probably to protect me. Probably because he thought that's what you do for family. It wasn't until I found the pharmacy receipts that the pieces locked together in the worst possible way. His heart medication, missed refills, skipped months. I confronted him as soon as he woke up. Grandpa, when's the last time you picked up your prescriptions? He glanced toward the window, as if the right answer might be floating somewhere outside. I've been cutting them in half to make them last longer. Money's been a little tight, because my parents had been draining him dry. You could have called me, I whispered, the weight of it all pressing against my chest. You didn't have to struggle like this. His hand trembled as he reached for mine. I didn't want to be a burden. The words shattered me. How many times had I told myself the same thing, that I didn't want to ask for too much? That I didn't want to be the reason someone else had to carry extra weight? It was like our whole family had been infected with this toxic loyalty, the idea that suffering in silence somehow made us good people. But it wasn't noble. It was how they kept us quiet. Grandpa wasn't eating properly either. I found stale bread, expired soup cans, and a refrigerator stocked with little more than ketchup and a carton of eggs 2 weeks past their date. When I asked him why he hadn't gone shopping, he said Tyler had promised to pick up groceries. Of course, Tyler never showed up. He never does. The realization slammed into me. My parents hadn't just neglected me. They'd abandoned Grandpa, too. They were so busy pouring money into Tyler's endless hole that they had forgotten the man who had built the very foundation they stood on. It made me sick, but it also made me furious. I called my mom, rage burning in my throat. How could you leave him like this? He's your father. Her voice on the other end was maddeningly casual. Paige, we're doing the best we can. Things have just been really hard lately with Tyler. That was always the excuse. Tyler's problems swallowed everything. Money, time, attention, basic human decency. I told her about the unpaid bills, about the empty fridge, about the missed medication. Her response, well, he's a grown man. He should have said something if it was that bad. I wanted to scream. She had made it his fault, just like she always made it mine. When I told Grandpa what she said, he just sighed, as if he had already come to terms with their absence long before I did. They've been like this for years. Sweetheart, your mother's always believed Tyler needed her more. But that wasn't love. That was convenience. That was a story they told themselves so they didn't have to face their own failures. I looked around Grandpa's house and saw it clearly for the first time, not just the physical neglect, but the emotional rot that had seeped into every corner. A man who had spent his life showing up for others, now left behind when he needed someone the most. And I realized no one was coming to save us. Not me. Not him. I couldn't fix Tyler. I couldn't make my parents see what they didn't want to see. But I could make sure that Grandpa wasn't alone in this anymore. I could fight for him the way he'd always quietly fought for me. And this time, I wouldn't wait until everything else collapsed. This time, I would act before it was too late. If you asked my parents, they'd tell you Tyler's troubles were always temporary. Just a phase. Just a rough patch. Just something we all had to get through again. But as I stood in Grandpa's living room that cold Saturday morning, staring at the final notices, the unpaid prescriptions, and the stack of grocery lists Tyler never filled, I knew. Tyler wasn't in a phase. He was in free fall, and my parents were too busy cushioning his landing to see that they'd already thrown the rest of us overboard. I called him twice. 3 times before his phone eventually went straight to voicemail. It wasn't the first time he'd disappeared when the weight of responsibility caught up to him. I knew where he'd gone before I even hung up the phone. The casino. When I drove there, I told myself I just wanted to find him. Just to talk. But part of me was boiling, desperate for an answer he'd never be able to give me. I found him leaning against the far wall near the slot machines, eyes glassy, thumb flicking over his phone like he didn't have a single care in the world. He was laughing at something on the screen, oblivious to the fact that our family was crumbling behind him. When he saw me, his grin faltered but didn't fully fall away. Paige, hey, what are you doing here? What was I doing there? That was a good question. Why was I still chasing him? Still trying to pull him out of the fire when he kept diving headfirst into it? You've been dodging me, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He shrugged. Been busy. Busy gambling. Busy losing other people's money. Busy pretending none of this was real. I told him I knew about the money. All of it. My savings. Grandpa's mortgage. The loans he'd borrowed on their behalf. I told him I knew how he promised he'd fix it. But never did. I told him I knew about the empty refrigerator Grandpa had been waiting for him to fill. His shoulders stiffened. But the words didn't land the way I wanted them to. I think a part of him had heard this speech before from teachers, from therapists, from the long list of people my parents had dragged into his orbit to fix him. You don't get it, he said, his voice low but defensive. I didn't ask Mom and Dad to take your money. I didn't ask them to put Grandpa's house on the line. They did that. They chose that. And he wasn't wrong. They did choose that. They always chose him. Whether he asked for it or not. But that wasn't enough anymore. You might not have asked, I said. But you let it happen. And you've been letting it happen for years. His jaw tensed, but I kept going. I told him about Grandpa's missed medications, about how he'd been cutting pills in half just to get by. I told him about the unpaid bills, the empty pantry, the promises Tyler never kept. That finally cracked something in him. I didn't mean for him to go without. He muttered, I thought I'd win enough to pay him back. That's the story you keep selling yourself. Isn't it? I shot back. That the next win will fix everything. That the next hand will buy back all the damage you've done. He rubbed his face, the bravado slipping just slightly. What do you want me to say? Paige. That I'm the screw-up. The family disaster. You've always thought that. No, I said, my voice softening despite the rage burning beneath my ribs. I've always thought you're better than this. But you keep proving me wrong. The words hung between us, heavy, bitter, but necessary. He looked down at his sneakers, scuffed and worn, not the designer ones he used to flaunt. Maybe even Tyler had run out of people to bail him out. For a brief moment, I saw the boy I grew up with, the one who used to build forts out of couch cushions, who used to draw superheroes on notebook paper, who used to make me laugh until I cried. Where had that kid gone? When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. I don't know how to stop. That confession nearly broke me, because I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe this was the first brick in rebuilding something. But the truth is, Tyler's problem wasn't just the gambling. It was the safety net my parents had always laid out beneath him. They had absorbed his every consequence. They had wrapped every mistake in soft explanations and temporary fixes. And they had stolen from me and from Grandpa to keep the lie alive. Tyler didn't know how to stop because he never had to. No one ever let him fall far enough to need to. Until now. Then figure it out. I told him. Because I'm not cleaning up this one. I turned to leave, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. When I got home, Grandpa was sitting in his chair, staring out the window like he'd been waiting for me. Did you find him? He asked quietly. I did, I answered, my throat tight. But he has to find himself now. For the first time, I wasn't going to be the one to catch him. And somehow, that felt like the first step towards saving us both. I always thought I would quietly carry this weight forever. That I would stay in the shadows, cleaning up the messes, balancing the debts, holding the walls up while everyone else leaned against me. But there's something about watching the people you love tear each other apart and call it loyalty that finally forces you to stand up. I didn't plan it. I didn't sit down with some grand strategy or blueprint for revenge. What happened next was born from exhaustion, from the suffocating realization that if I didn't fight back, I would drown in the wreckage of the life they built around Tyler. It started the morning after I walked out of that casino. I sat at Grandpa's kitchen table, running my thumb over the chipped edge of his coffee mug, staring at the stack of unpaid bills like they were a puzzle I was somehow supposed to solve. My parents were unreachable on another weekend getaway. According to the neighbor, Tyler wasn't answering my calls. And I realized no one else was coming. There was no cavalry. So I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. His name was Mark Landon, recommended by a friend of a friend who had dealt with financial abuse in her family. When I explained the situation, he didn't sound surprised. You're not alone in this, he said. But you'll need to move quickly. The words jolted me, as if someone had flipped on a light in a house I'd been blindly stumbling through. I had power here, maybe for the first time. Mark walked me through it step by step, gather the bank statements, collect the loan documents, save text messages, get copies of the mortgage agreements. I dove into it with a determination I didn't know I had, scanning every receipt, organizing years of hidden financial trails. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. My parents had used Grandpa's retirement like their personal ATM. There were withdrawals for Tyler's debts, But there were also charges for vacation resorts, expensive dinners, and shopping sprees. Thousands of dollars gone not to save Tyler, but to prop up the illusion that everything was fine. They hadn't just sacrificed me and Grandpa to rescue Tyler. They'd used us to maintain their own comfort. And I was done playing along, with Mark's help. I filed paperwork to obtain power of attorney over Grandpa's finances. The process was painfully fast once we provided evidence of their missed prescriptions, unpaid utilities, empty food cabinets. Grandpa was sharp enough to sign the documents himself, to look me in the eye and say, "I trust you with this." I've never carried anything more carefully in my life. From there, the plan unfolded. I contacted Grandpa's mortgage company and froze additional borrowing against the house. I cut off my parents' access to his accounts. I scheduled an appointment to tour an assisted living facility near my apartment one with people who would actually look after him instead of using him. For the first time, I started thinking about what Grandpa wanted instead of what would keep my parents comfortable. I was taking back our future one piece at a time, and I wasn't subtle about it. I called my mother while she was still lounging at a beach resort, her voice breezy, as if the last few weeks had been nothing but a small family misunderstanding. "You went through my accounts?" she asked, her tone teetering between offense and disbelief. "I had to," I said plainly. "You've been using Grandpa like a checkbook. That stops now." Her silence crackled on the other end of the line, heavy with the weight of losing control. "You're overreacting, Paige. This is just temporary. We were going to pay everyone back." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I'd finally reached the point where their recycled excuses couldn't touch me anymore. "You've been paying it back for a decade. Mom, it's over. I've taken power of attorney. I've frozen the accounts. I'm moving Grandpa out of that house. You can fight me if you want, but I'll win." The rage I expected from her never came. What came instead was panic. Where are we supposed to get money now? It was the clearest window I'd ever had into their real priorities. Not, what will happen to Grandpa? Not, how can we fix this? But, what will happen to us without his money? For the first time, I didn't answer. I just hung up. I wish I could tell you that I felt triumphant in that moment, that I fist-pumped the air and smiled. But the truth is, it hurt. Setting boundaries with the people who raised you isn't some victory parade. It's grief. It's the death of the version of your family you desperately wanted to believe in. I wasn't celebrating, I was mourning. But I was also choosing to protect myself and Grandpa in ways they never would've. That's where the fight started. Not in rage, not in revenge, but in the quiet, stubborn decision to finally choose myself. For years, I had imagined what it would take to reach Tyler, what kind of disaster would finally break through the fog of denial and make him see the truth. I always thought it would be something dramatic. Maybe a car accident, maybe an arrest, maybe one final gamble that cost him everything. But I never imagined the hardest thing Tyler would ever face was simply running out of people to save him. After I cut off my parents' access to Grandpa's money and moved Grandpa into assisted living, Tyler went silent. No texts, no calls, not even his usual flurry of desperate voicemails when his life spun out of control. I told myself I didn't care, that I wasn't going to be the one to chase him this time. But when I heard from Kyle, a childhood friend who'd seen Tyler slipping further into debt, I realized I wasn't finished. Not really. Kyle told me Tyler had been spotted crashing on couches, borrowing money from people he barely knew, begging for second chances he no longer had the credit to ask for. "He's not doing well," Kyle said, hesitant. "I think he's scared. I think maybe he finally hit that wall." A part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay safe in the life I was rebuilding for myself and Grandpa. But I also knew that if I didn't at least try, I would carry that silence like a stone for the rest of my life. So I found him. It didn't take long. When I walked into that dingy apartment, Kyle had mentioned a place Tyler was squatting in with people who looked like they hadn't slept in days. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt sad, not angry, Not victorious. Just sad. Tyler looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. The way someone shrinks when life finally strips away all their borrowed armor. He glanced up when he saw me. "Did Mom send you?" I shook my head. "She doesn't know I'm here." His eyes flicked away. "So, what? You're here to tell me off? To say, I told you so?" I didn't say anything. I just sat across from him, the distance between us feeling wider than it had ever been. "You cut me off," he said after a long pause, his voice bitter but cracked. "You cut off everyone. I've got nothing now." "You had nothing long before I stepped away," I said quietly. "You just didn't want to admit it." He bristled but didn't argue. For the first time, I think he realized I wasn't here to fight him. I was here because despite everything, I still cared. But caring didn't mean enabling him anymore. I told him about Grandpa, about the assisted living facility, about the day I helped him pack the last of his things while Mom texted me vacation photos as if none of it mattered. Tyler winced, the shame breaking through his fragile wall. "I didn't mean to take from him," he whispered. I thought I could fix it before it got bad." "That's what you always think," I said, not cruelly but honestly. "And while you're thinking that, you're pulling everyone else under." He leaned his head against the chipped drywall, eyes squeezed shut. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. The same words he'd said to me at the casino weeks before, but this time, they landed differently. There was no deflection in his voice, no bravado, just exhaustion. "You don't have to stop by yourself," I said, my throat tightening. "But you do have to choose to stop." "And what? Go to rehab? Let them lock me away like some kind of failure?" I shook my head. "No one's locking you away, but you need real help. Tyler, help you can't get from another borrowed dollar or another empty promise." He stared at me, searching my face for something, maybe for proof that I meant it, that I wasn't here to punish him. "Would you even help me after everything?" "That's the thing, Tyler," I said softly. "I don't want to keep saving you. I want you to save yourself. But if you decide to try for real, I'll be there. I just won't carry you anymore." The silence between us stretched, heavy and raw. "Finally," he whispered. "I'm so tired. Paige, I've been tired for years." His voice cracked under the weight of his own admission, and I realized I'd never really seen him like this before, stripped of all the defenses our family had built around him. Not Tyler the screw-up, not Tyler the addict, just Tyler, a scared, exhausted kid who didn't know how to stop running. I handed him the brochure for the treatment center I'd already researched. It was close enough that I could visit, but strict enough that he couldn't coast. "You don't have to decide today," I told him. "But if you want this, I'll help you get there." He took the brochure with trembling hands, eyes brimming with something I hadn't seen in him for a long time. Hope. Faint. Fragile. But it was there. I stood up, ready to leave him with his choice. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly, the question so small it almost got lost between us. "No," I said, my voice firm. "But I won't lose myself trying to save you." His tears fell silently as he nodded, understanding for the first time that love doesn't always look like rescue. Sometimes, love looks like stepping back. And sometimes, that's exactly what saves us. Some people think that once you stand up to your family, there's this neat, satisfying ending, like they'll suddenly apologize, change overnight, and you can all move on together, healed and whole. But that's not how real life works. Real life is messy. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't even realize they've done anything wrong. And sometimes they know, but they just don't care enough to stop. The week after I left Tyler with the rehab brochure, everything started to shift. He called me 2 days later, not with excuses, not with another web of promises, but with the simple, quiet decision to go. No grand speech, no desperation in his voice, just a worn out. I'm ready. I didn't ask if he was doing it for me. I didn't ask if he was scared. I just told him I'd drive him there. Because sometimes loving someone means showing up for the choice they finally make, not the ones they've failed to make before. The morning I picked him up, he looked different. Not better, not worse. Just stripped down. As if all the layers of bravado he'd worn for years had finally peeled away, leaving him raw and uncertain. We didn't talk much during the drive. I think we both needed the silence. When we arrived at the treatment center, he hesitated at the gate, his fingers twitching as if his body still hadn't caught up to his decision. You can still turn back, I told him gently, but he shook his head. If I turn back now, I'll never stop running. He met my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my brother, not the chaos, not the addiction, but the person he used to be, the person who still wanted to exist beneath all of it. I'll see you soon, I said, my throat tightening. You better, he managed, his voice breaking just a little. Watching him walk through those doors was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I was afraid he'd fail, but because I had to let go of the version of myself that thought I could save him. While Tyler focused on his recovery, I kept moving forward with Grandpa's transition. I sold the old house, the one that had carried so many cracks both in the walls and in our family. The day I handed the keys to the realtor, I walked through those empty rooms one last time. The hollow echo of my footsteps reminded me of all the birthdays, holidays, and quiet battles that had happened inside those walls. There was a strange grief in letting it go, but there was also relief. I wasn't tied to that house anymore. I wasn't tied to the memories that lived there, or to the belief that staying in the wreckage somehow made me loyal. Grandpa settled into his new assisted living apartment, closer to me, closer to the version of family we were both rebuilding. I visited him every evening after work, sometimes just to sit with him while he told me the same stories I'd already heard a dozen times. We found comfort in the repetition. We found peace in the new routine. As for my parents, well, some fractures don't heal the way you want them to. They didn't apologize. They didn't even fight the power of attorney transfer. Maybe because they knew I had the evidence. Maybe because they were too tired to pretend they hadn't caused the damage. They sent me one email, a carefully worded, half-hearted explanation about misunderstandings and temporary borrowing and doing the best they could. I never replied. I didn't need to. I wasn't seeking their permission anymore. I wasn't asking for their understanding. I had finally realized that boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're self-respect made visible, and once you build them, you don't need to explain them. I poured everything I could into my graduate program, using the portion of my savings I'd managed to recover, along with a small repayment plan I'd legally secured from my parents. It wasn't everything they owed me, but it was enough to move forward. I didn't look back. Some days, I missed the version of family I thought I had, the family I wanted us to be, but I didn't miss the weight I used to carry. I didn't miss the silence. I didn't miss the guilt. When Tyler completed his first 90 days of treatment, I visited him at the center. He looked healthier, a little stronger, still uncertain, still rebuilding, but for the first time, he didn't flinch from accountability. I'm sorry for everything, he told me, not because you need to hear it, but because I need to say it. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't about words. It's about choosing to keep showing up. It's about letting people earn their way back into your life. Brick by brick. Day by day. It's not fast. It's not clean. But it's real. And for the first time, I wasn't living in the story my family had written for me. I was writing my own, looking back on everything I went through. I used to think that family loyalty meant sacrifice no matter what the cost. I thought that being a good daughter, a good sister, meant I had to carry everyone's burdens, fix every problem, and always be the one who stayed, no matter how much it broke me. But I've learned something I wish I had known years ago. Loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing accountability. And family doesn't mean you have to tolerate being used. It took me a long time to understand that boundaries are not punishments. They are necessary. Boundaries protect your peace. They protect your future. They protect your ability to love the people who matter in a healthy way, not out of obligation or guilt, but from a place of true connection. Sometimes we grow up in families where one person's needs, addictions, or mistakes become the center of the universe. And when that happens, people like me, the responsible ones, the quiet ones, the ones who never ask for help, get swallowed up. We get used to being the solution. We get used to being the safety net. But you can't heal someone who doesn't want to heal. You can't rescue someone who's not willing to step toward change. And you can't set yourself on fire just to keep everyone else warm. If you're reading this and you feel like you're carrying too much, like you've been the glue holding your family together while you slowly come undone, please hear me. It's okay to put the weight down. It's okay to say no. It's okay to walk away from toxic patterns. It's okay to choose your own well-being. Even if other people don't understand, that doesn't make you cruel. That doesn't make you selfish. That makes you someone who finally sees their own worth. And here's the hardest, most freeing part. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, even if they don't like them. The ones who only loved what you could give them. They may fall away, and maybe they're supposed to. The life I'm building now is not perfect, but it's mine. It's built on choices I made for myself, not sacrifices I was forced into. I'm not carrying everyone anymore, and I am finally learning how to carry myself. That's the lesson I wish I had learned sooner, but maybe you can learn it now.